Okay, everybody, welcome back. We're in week 7, and this week in the syllabus is listed as access control design, and we will talk a little bit about access control design. It's not a difficult thing to do, really, because once you know what you want your system to do, there's only certain places you can put things. But there are some tips and tricks that I want to go over with you. But this week we're also going to go over some other stuff, and we're going to take it a little bit light. The university has realized that we have no spring break this year, and we have a condensed 15 weeks, right? It's actually 15, not 16, with the week break in the middle. And so we're trying now in the midterm week to be a little bit human with you guys, right? It's time to catch up a little bit. Doesn't mean there's nothing due this week. There is, but I think you can get the work done relatively quickly, and it's a little bit lighter this week. So hopefully you can use your time to recharge just a little bit. So let's talk about what we're going to work on this week. So last week you gave us your design for your lock sets, and we're going to review those. I'm going to show you what I proposed, but that doesn't mean that what you proposed is wrong. Remember, you're putting a lock on the room, making assumptions as to things that will go on in that room. Your assumptions may be different than mine. You'll see that especially with safe rooms. We will talk a little bit about that. I don't want you to necessarily just take the design I have and assume it's right, because you're going to have to defend it. In week 14, we're going to have some team meetings. I'm going to ask you why you chose to put a certain lock on a door, amongst other things. The drawing is going to have alarm systems and cameras and all those great things on it. And I'm going to ask you individually to defend something. And if you say, well, I put this lock on because you did, that's a wrong answer, right? So just know your logic. But we'll review the locks. I'll show you what I proposed and why I did it. And then you can decide whether you like mine, whether you like yours, whether you like something somebody else did, and you're okay. We're going to go over the access control features one more time, not necessarily the whole wiring, this controls this and that controls that, but we'll talk a little bit about some of the features that will help you design where you put your access control bits and pieces, if you will, right? Then this week you'll make any changes you want to make in your lock scheme, right? You can make changes to your drawing if you like, and you'll be resubmitting that with the access control features on your design. So we're layering these diagrams, right? First is the lock sets, and now we're going to layer over access control components. And then later on in the semester, we're going to overlay intrusion detection, and then we're going to overlay cameras, and then potentially some other devices that we may want to put in. And then after we do that, then we know what our building perimeter looks like, the skin of the building, as I said. Then I'm going to take you back outside into that outside drawing, and we're going to do the exterior a little bit in our leisure time, if you will. So in the end, you're going to have a fully designed, fully functioning physical security system on a building. So let's jump right into our drawing. So there it is, the Butler County Warehouse. It's a very, very basic drawing, and it's the one we're going to stick with for the semester. And I hope you made several copies of this when you had the opportunity to make some copies. If you don't have a printer at home, because you probably will want to make some changes as we go along, and that's perfectly acceptable. So here you see where I added the outside doors, which is different than about 50% of you. And it was about a 50-50 mix of which door was the main door and which one is the emergency exit. I did not see many people who wanted both of them to be entry doors. I think you can do that. There's no reason why you can't. However, it will give you added expense. You want to know, remember, one of the things we wanted to know was who went in and out of the warehouse itself, right? The warehouse really, even though it says warehouse area on that big open area, it's contiguous to everything else. So if you look at the entire square of the building is really the warehouse, right? Because you can go up the stairs into any other part of it. So you needed to know who got in and out of the building. So in order to do that, first off, you need a reader on both sides of the door. A reader on the outside will tell you who went in, right? Somebody runs, let's go with access cards, right? Let's use the most basic system, right? They walk up, they hold their card to the reader. The door says, okay, it goes to the panel, comes back and says, yep, Brian can get in here. It opens the door for us, and it puts it in the history that Brian entered the building at this exact time, and it goes right to the millisecond if you'd like. When Brian leaves, if there's a REX device on the inside, it will only say something's moving here, it's a human body, it's picking up the infrared, and it's, okay, great, open the door. Somebody wants to leave, and it will unlock the door. But it won't tell me when Brian left. So in order to tell who went in and out of any facility, you need to have readers on both sides of exit doors. So in this case, I put readers on both sides of that south door. We'll call it the south door. We'll assume a north-south orientation of the building, and we'll continue to do that for the remainder of the semester. So top is north, bottom is south, to the left is the west, to the right is the east. I made the east door the emergency exit. There was a reason that I chose that, and something that you probably would not know unless you've worked on a loading dock, but this was my logic. Next to the doors where I put the readers, there are 3 dotted blocks. Those are loading docks. And in front of those, the skin of the building there has 3 big openings. Those are overhead doors, so trucks can back up and load and unload from the warehouse area. If I use the east door as my main entrance, truck drivers will need to get out of their trucks, walk all the way around, walk through my warehouse. Now, these are people who are not my employees, so I have to get them in somehow. So someone would need to go all the way over there to meet them to let them in so that they could come in and do their paperwork. And there's a fair amount of paperwork that goes with any loading dock operation. One of the big ones is that you'd be surprised how many trucks show up somewhere and don't belong. They're at the wrong place. I mean, maybe at the wrong company. Right? There was a transposed number on the address, and it's in an industrial park, and it says you're going to number 123 Main Street, and you go to 123, and you were supposed to go to 132. Well, you back up to the dock, and if somebody just opens the door and starts unloading your stuff, you could have a warehouse meant for gums and mints, and you could be unloading TV sets, right? And then you've got to reload them all. So the first thing that happens is the trucks back up to the dock. Then either the driver comes inside, or the dock worker goes outside to meet the driver to verify that they are at the right place, they have the right materials. They normally take that bill of lading, which is what the dock driver or the truck driver is carrying. It's just an inventory of what's on the truck and where it's supposed to go and where it originated. And the dock worker will normally go inside and match that up with a purchase order. Someone purchased the stuff on that truck, right? Or arranged to have it sent there. There's some sort of an order saying send 50 boxes of gums and mints to this warehouse on this particular day with this carrier. And if the 50 boxes show up and there's no record that anybody ever requested them, why would you unload them? It could be an error. That's just doubling work. So paperwork gets checked against orders. If you had the readers where I put them on the south side, the truck driver can get out, walk up to the door, knock on the door, or ring a doorbell, and someone can go over, use their badge, and let them in. You can have a release on the door if you so desire. When we talk about cameras, we'll have a camera there as well, probably. But if we go with the east door, they need to walk all the way around and through your warehouse, and either the dock workers have to go over to that far door, or the truck drivers need to tromp through. Means also that you're going to need to shovel snow in a sidewalk, right? Sometimes it snows in Butler County, from what I understand. If you're just using it for emergency exit, you only need to shovel out a certain distance, right, by law to make it safe. But you don't need to necessarily do the whole sidewalk coming from the dock side if there's not one. You just want to make sure people get out safely. There's a lot of reasons why you want the door as close to your activity as possible. There are other reasons why that may not be what you want, right? You may just say, well, wait a minute, I don't want my employees walking through the active loading and unloading area. I would say in a building this size, your number of employees is going to be pretty low. And so there's a safe way to do it. They can walk, they can hang an immediate left and go up the stairs to the offices. Or if they already work on the dock, they just go right on through. They already know the safety requirements. So I think I'm pretty sound with putting the door there. Again, if you want to go with the other one, or if you want both of them to have readers on both sides, power to you. You're going to meet your budget later on. And that may be something that you want to consider. But that's why I went that way. I'll put a mag lock on that door. Electric strike will work just as well. I like a mag lock on it for a couple of reasons, mainly because, again, it's on this exterior of the building. I don't show an awning there. Normally a set of stairs going up to a door like that would have some kind of awning to keep the ice off, right? It also keeps the sun off in the summertime because they're metal doors and they tend to warp a little bit. So normally there's an awning there, and an electric strike will work. So if you have an electric strike there and that's what you prefer, again, no big gig. And so this is how I designed it. Let your conscience be your guide. So next I went up to the conference room and the break room. And the break room to me was very simple. It's a passage set. You can't just leave it blank. If you say, I'm not going to put a lock on there, you can't leave it blank because the designer, the builder, will simply leave a door with a hole in it where the doorknob's supposed to be. A passage set is just that. It's a kind of a blank doorknob, really, if you think about it. I mean, it just, you can twist it if you want and have the door close and open without a key, without any device. But if you don't specify a privacy set there, then there'll be a hole in the door. Now, some of you had office lock sets there, and the logic is probably that people could go in and steal stuff out of the break room, right? There's normally the coffee pot and people's lunches and things like that. I would venture to say that you probably don't need to protect against that if you do good checks on your people beforehand. They're working in a warehouse that is full of, pilferable things, and eventually we're going to put marijuana in there. I'm assuming that you've got people background checked. If they're stealing lunches and coffee, that's something that you'll need to investigate. But I would venture to say that that would be the least likely thing that they would steal, right, as far as value. And so I went with a passage set there. I put an office lock on the conference room. I could have put a passage set there because the conference room could be open to anybody. I could have put a classroom security lock there if I thought about that as the safe room. If there was a shooter in the building, everybody run, get in the conference room, and close the door, and it stays locked. I mean, you could put a storeroom lock if you wanted to on there, I guess. It depends on what you're going to use the room for. If it's just a standard conference room, I put an office lock on that because sometimes when you're working big projects, you have things scattered all over a conference table. If you have a 2-day meeting going on in there for strategy, you may want to have things written on whiteboards, and you don't want certain people to go in there and look at those. You don't want the housekeeper to go in and erase the whiteboards that you've written all your strategy and your business decisions that you're working on, so you can lock the room. I would suggest you use a lock. I thought an office lock was the best thing for that, so that's why I went that direction. But again, think about what your use is. And finally, we got up to that, we'll call it executive row. I think, the drawing says executive office. I think it really means, more like foreman and supervisor office. You're in a warehouse this size. You really normally wouldn't have executives, although it could be a warehouse where the owner is the one running the warehouse. Therefore, that's where their office is. So we'll continue to call them executive offices. I put office locks on those normally. But some of you put classroom security locks on them because they were executive offices, because you wanted them to be able to lock themselves in case there was a riot on the floor, right? If there was an active shooter, if there was a problem, you wanted a safe area for them. If that was your logic, then classroom security lock was probably the way to go. I put standard office locks on them. You can still lock them the same way. It's just you have to worry about somebody that has a key to the office, right? I mean, I think that either one of those would be proper. I would normally go standard office lock there as well myself. I think if you actually are looking for a safe room in this building, the conference room is probably better because you could probably fit just about every employee that would fit on this floor in there. But again, it's okay either way. If you had a passage set there, that was a bad idea. If you had a privacy set there, that's kind of a bad idea because you could use a tool to open it from the outside. Warehouses tend to run, night shifts, right? When things get busy, they tend to run weekends when things get busy. Certain seasons of the year, warehouses are very active. You don't want to leave the boss's office in a state where somebody could easily get in. And with a privacy set, they could just use a tool from the outside, push it through that little hole normally, pops the lock, and they walk in. And then they start looking through the boss's stuff like people's reviews and letters of reprimand and raises and promotions for some people. It really is bad business. You want those doors to lock. Now we went over to the file room. Do you remember the instructions on the file room is you needed to know who went in, but not necessarily who went out. On this one, I put a reader on the outside, and I put a Rex on the inside. Now, the size of the room, the Rex device, you have to be careful with. You'd have to really, tune it in. Otherwise, you'd be setting it off when you're on the far side of the room. But I think that's a place where you have a reader in, because you need to know who went in and when. And then a Rex to get out, because the instructions basically told you didn't need to know when they went out, just who went in the room. I used an electric strike on that one because there was no chance of any weather interfering with it. And then also with electric strike, you can use a crash bar on the inside or some override so people can get out easily. Mag locks are harder. You have to drop the power, right? The electric strike, you just turn the handle and you can open the door from the inside, right? It's the outside where, the strike would have to absolutely work. So that's why I designed it that way. I know that at least one person had a cipher lock on there. That would work. If it's an electronic cipher lock, because it has to have a history. Remember, you need to know who went in and out, so you have to create a history. A standard mechanical cipher lock won't do that, but an electronic one will. And if you did that, you'd be fine. You wouldn't need a Rex. You would just, basically put a storeroom lock on that door. You put the cipher lock on and you have a storeroom function so that it stays in a constantly locked position. Jumping back, though, to those executive offices, there was one person I saw that put storeroom locks on those doors. Certainly it would work, but people who are in executive positions, people who are in management positions, don't tend to carry their keys around with them all the time. And every time they walk out of the room, the door's going to close and it's going to lock, and their keys are going to be on the inside. And about a week of that, you'll be changing the lock, which is why I think a storeroom lock set in that regard is a very bad idea. But you could use a storeroom type function on a cipher lock, set it up so that it acts the same way, so that it's always locked. You use your code rather than a key to get in, and the door closes behind you, and nobody's going to follow you in. You wouldn't need a REX because the lock itself is not, it's mechanical in nature, right? Even though it's keeping a history, it's mechanical in nature. It's not, you don't need electric strike for that with a cipher lock. And so you wouldn't need to have a REX either. So a couple ways to do that. I went with a reader. I just think it's easier. If you're going to put an access control system in, then you want to limit the number of cipher locks, quite frankly, because they're as expensive in the long run. An electronic one runs about $1,000. So does putting in a reader in many cases. And then you have to go to the site and program it. You can't go to the host and program it. You have to actually go to the lock itself to take people's codes out, those kind of things. So I would stick with a reader there. That was just the way I designed the building. That's the way I designed the building. Doesn't mean it's the way you design the building. So really what I did is I went through a series of decision points on each one of those doors. Did I need a record of who went in? Did I need a record of who went out? Right? If that's required, you kind of know what you need to do, right? There's limited choices. Does the room need to be locked at all, right? Does it require constant locking? Does it always need to be locked from the outside, no matter what? Does it act as an office and a safe room? And I know I've mentioned safe rooms quite a bit, and they're just a place you go that's hardened a little bit that keeps people safe if there's a major event in the building, a dangerous event. But some offices, you really in a building, you normally want to have someplace designated as a safe room. And frankly, I would also designate it as a safe room if it's. I'd put it as low to the ground as possible because you could also use it as a tornado shelter, right? Hurricane shelter. But if the room acts as both an office and a safe room, maybe you might want to put a little bit stronger type of lock on there. And then you have to think about getting the keys back. Right? If people leave the company, you have to get the key back or you have to change the key, right? And that's an expensive thing to do. You call a locksmith and they have to rekey rooms if people don't turn their keys in. So if you don't have keys at all and you're using electronic access control, you just go into the host and you take that person's access out, and that badge they have is basically worthless. It's an ID badge, but it's not going to get them in and out of doors. So again, all these decision points really, do you need a record who went in? Do you need a record who went out? Does the room even need to be locked? Does it need to be locked all the time? Are you using it for something besides an office or a conference room, or is there a secondary purpose of the room that would make you think about a different type of lock? And then think about keys. They're hard to recover. If somebody leaves and doesn't bring them back, you have an expense of changing the locks, and you'll need to do that. So based on the criticality of the room, you may want to have to do that right away, right on a Sunday night when you're going to pay a locksmith a ton of money. So those are kind of the decision points. So let's kind of throw those decision points at the different rooms and see why I came up with the locks that I chose to use. Okay, the break room. Do you need to know who went in? No. Do you need to know who went out? Nope. Does it need to be locked? Not really. There's nothing in there but the microwave and the refrigerator and people's lunches and maybe the coffee pot, right? Does it require constant locking? Well, it doesn't need to be locked at all, so that's even a no times 2. Does it act as an office or a room for its normal function, break room, and a safe room? It could, but probably not. It's kind of small, right? I wouldn't want people, if I'm going to have a safe room in a building like this, it's either going to be for everybody or it's going to be for my executives, the ones who are most vulnerable in that type of event. But the break room I wouldn't want everybody running to the break room. Nobody's normally there, so everybody has to go to a new place, right? So probably not. And are the keys going to be hard to recover? Well, there's really no keys needed because we're not going to, the other questions were no. So it's easily a passage set, in my opinion. Again, if you have a different function for that room, if you have different logic, if you think people will steal coffee and lunches and that's something that you want to, monitor, heck, you could put anything you want on the room. But expense is expense, budgets are budgets. You want to go with the easiest to access that still secures the room, and that in this case is a passage set because you don't need to secure that room. So that one was pretty easy. So I went to the conference room. Do you need a record of who went in and out? Nope. Does it need to be locked? Maybe. Again, if you have one of those long 2-day meetings where you're in a conference room and you're writing your business strategy on whiteboards and, the end of the day comes, you can't just erase that stuff and start fresh the next day. So you maybe want to lock that room, right? You may have a project going on where it's raise time and the HR people go into that room to lay out everybody's, performance evaluations for the year and decide how they're going to divvy up their raise money for the year. You don't want to leave that room unlocked, right? Everybody will know what's going on in there. They'll be trying to get in. So you may want to lock that, right? Does it require constant locking? No. If it's just, normal conference room and nothing's going on in there and it's just the table and chairs, it doesn't need to be locked. It may be a place where you have informal team meetings for your night shift, where people gather to, just discuss basic business stuff, and you wouldn't want to have to go get a key every time. So it doesn't require constant locking. You might want to use that as your safe room. And if that's the case, then you'd probably go with a classroom security lock, the new style, because that's the most secure of the locks for that purpose, right? You don't have to leave the room to lock it, and you use a key. You can lock it from the inside. Are keys hard to recover? Well, you're going to limit the number of keys you issue. Remember, each office lock has a different key that fits it, right? You'll have a master key probably for the whole building, but you'll give the one executive in the corner their key, and you'll give the other guy his key, and you could have another key for the conference room that maybe just supervisors carry if you're going to lock it. Or you just give it to the executives, or it may be something that you issue out when somebody wants to lock the door, you give them the key so they can lock it, and they bring it back and you lock the key up, right? But you can have a limited number issued, so they're not going to be hard to recover. My decision was an office lock set, but again, think about what you want to use the room for, if that's the type of lock you're going to use. So the executive offices, you don't really need to know who went in and out in a history, but those doors need to be locked. Certainly at night when the executives aren't around, they're going to want to lock their doors. They will have, personally identifiable information on people. They'll have their personnel files perhaps in the desk. They'll have personal information on people and their work performance in those offices. They may have petty cash in those offices. You definitely want those to lock. So you definitely have to have a lock that can be locked and you can control the key, right? Does it need to be constantly locked? Well, most of the time during the day, executives will leave their door propped open, right? Lets a little airflow in. It makes them look a little bit more accessible. They don't necessarily want the door closed all the time unless they need privacy. So it doesn't need to be locked all the time. Is it going to operate as both an office and maybe a safe room? Maybe. So you have to think about that. You can issue a limited number of keys, so they're not going to be hard to recover. It's not like you have to give everybody a key. So an office lock set or even up to a classroom security lock set will work on those depending on what you want to use them for. But you definitely need something that locks. You couldn't use a passage set. You wouldn't want to use a privacy that could be opened with a tool. And I wouldn't put electronic access control on those doors simply because it's a big expense. And I just don't think it's warranted that you need to have that, because you don't need to have a history of who went in and out, which is really one of the big drivers of electronic access control. So now we go to the file room. And do you need a record of who went in? And the answer is yes. That was in the instructions, that we want to know who goes in the file room. We're going to keep samples in there. We're going to keep personnel files, long-term storage in there. We need to know who went in. So as soon as you say you need a record of who went into a room, automatically you're talking about something electronic. A key is not going to create an electronic record. There are something called an electronic key, but really it's just a reader. It's shaped like a key. It's kind of weird, but you really need to have a record. You're thinking about two things. You're thinking about electronic access control, like card readers, or you're thinking about an electronic cipher lock, right? One of those two will create a history for you. So right away, you can take out any other type of lock. Do you need a record who went out? You don't. So now you only need to put that device that records the history on the outside of the door. You don't need it on the inside too. So you saved half the install cost, right? Does the room need to be locked? Yes, it does need to be locked. So, pretty much that goes without saying. And it requires constant locking. We know that because only certain people get in. We want to keep a record who went in. If it's not constantly locked, how would we know that? Right? Does it act as both an office and a safe room? No, not really. It's too small to be a safe room, in my opinion. You could use it for that, I suppose, but I wouldn't go that route. Are keys and codes going to be hard to recover? There'll be a limited number of people who can get into that file room. Not everybody's going to get in there. So, you could limit the number, but codes have to be changed when somebody leaves, right? Somebody leaves the company, they have a specific code they use in that electronic cipher lock. Now you have to go to that lock, you plug in a laptop computer or a device that accompanies the lock set, and you change and take codes out, put new people in, associate them with codes. You have to go there to do it. Much easier to do from a host, which you can do remotely, which we'll talk about in a second. So I would go with electronic access control on that, for sure, card reader, but only on one side, which means if there's a reader on one side, you have to have something to let the door unlock on the other. That's a REX. And then we talked about, maglock or electric strike. Either one's acceptable. I used a strike in there because it just seemed like an easier way to go for me. It's something that I would do. I'm not even sure why I would choose that. I think when you're talking maglocks and electric strikes, if you're not in bad weather, you can use either. Some people like to standardize on the maglock. They don't make a noise. You don't have to cut the frame as badly. I used a strike, but again, your choice. But in this case, because you need a record, you need a history, automatically all of those mechanical locks came off the table and you were stuck with either the electronic access control or an electronic cipher lock. I went with the cleaner, I think, access control because it's less work when people leave. So let's now work our way out to the main perimeter doors, right? The dock man door that I made my main entrance, right? Do you need a record of who went in? Yes, you do, because that was in the instructions, and you need a record who went out. So in and out, you need to have readers on both sides of the door. You could use a double cipher lock, one on the outside and one on the inside, but why would you want to do that? That would be a bear to try to connect. This is an absolute case where you need a history of who went in and out of a door, where you have readers on both sides of the door. It needs to be locked, right? It's the perimeter. You can't let just anybody walk into your warehouse. It requires constant locking. It's not going to be used as an office or a safe room. The whole building itself is not a safe room in that way. So it's not someplace you go and if somebody bad gets in the warehouse, you don't go hide in the warehouse. You go someplace else, right? Are keys and codes going to be hard to recover? Well, everybody who works in the warehouse is going to need access to get in that outside door, all of your employees. So, heck yes, if you use just a mechanical lock on there, first off, you wouldn't have the history. Second off, you'd have to give everybody who works there a key. So now, one person leaves and you call them and they call and they say, I quit, I'm not coming back. Okay, I need your key back. Yeah, okay, come get it. Or, yeah, I'll get it to you when I get there. And over the course of time, you'll be changing that lock every month or so because people come and go in jobs, right? We know that. With an electronic access control, you'll just go to the host and you'll take them in and out. You'll take their access in and out. If you don't recover their access badge, okay, so be it. That happens all the time, but it's really useless because it won't work on the reader because you've taken them out of the host, right? So you don't have to recover anything. So this is an automatic decision of access control system, both sides of the door, so you have the history in and out. That one's kind of a no-brainer. Again, the type of lock, maglock or electric strike, is really up to you. Outside door, bad weather potential. I went with a maglock, but I would not begrudge anybody who wanted to try an electric strike in that and just cover it with a plate. Especially if the door was already cut for it if this were an existing warehouse, but I went with a maglock. So when we went down that list of criteria, right, the decision points, try to get that out, right? Think about key control. How many keys would you need to issue? If you have a room where you're going to put a lock on the door because this door's got to stay locked, but everybody in the company needs to get in and out of it, then it's really not a candidate for a hard key, because you're going to issue those out and you're eventually not going to get many back. And you'll be in a constant state of changing the lock and reissuing keys. It'll be a full-time vocation if you have a big enough company. So think about key control. If key control is going to be a problem where a lot of people need to get in and out of a certain area, then access control is probably the better way to go. If you need a history, then all the mechanical locks really have come off the table and you're down to electronic cipher locks or some sort of access control, automatic electronic access control system, right? Predict the room use a little bit. That's where it gets a little bit foggy and where you may have differences with me, and that's okay. Again, we talked about safe rooms, and that's a great example to use, but there are other things to think about where you may have dual use for a room. If you use the conference room and said if something bad happened, everybody report to the conference room, and I want a classroom security lock on that because it's a better way for them not to have to run back out to lock the door. Okay, makes sense. If you use the executive offices that way, okay, makes sense. If you use none of it and you say, I don't have a safe room in this building because I don't anticipate that to be a big threat, and people can just take cover wherever they are, shelter in place or evacuate the building, any number of things, then you're just going to use it as an office. Anticipate a little bit what you're going to use the room for, right? What the room's actual purpose is, an executive office, but then you may say, but these guys, people aren't going to like these guys, right? They're executives. People tend to, if they get mad at the company, they're mad at the executives. Maybe I want to put something a little higher on there because it's an executive office. Really, that is your call. And then finally, the expense, right? Is an investment practical? We could put electronic access control on every one of these doors. There's no question. Even though we don't need a history, doesn't mean we can't have one, right? We could just put card readers at every one of these doors and be done with it. And we'd be secure, absolutely secure. But the expense would be astronomical. So expense is something that you have to consider as well. Is the investment really practical? Is it worth it? Do I need to spend on electronics where mechanics will do? And if the mechanics won't do, then I need to go electronics and I need to justify that spend. So really it's prediction of the use, using those decision points. I was really impressed with the drawings that you submitted. I think they looked really good. There were a few that were kind of off base a little bit, but that I will tell you that, the great thing about D2L is you can look and see how much people spend, time they spend, and whether they actually go through and look at things in the course. And those that were off base for a reason. But those of you who did the work really came up with some pretty good designs, different from mine, but okay. The logic that you used, and some of you explained that logic in your posts, when you were conversing with others, made perfect sense to me. So if you're comfortable with your design, keep it. If not, you can make some tweaks to it this week before you submit it with the next overlay on it. And the next overlay is going to be access control design. Now, this is not nearly as hard as you think, because really you're going to pick out reader locations. You're going to determine how many panels you need. And we know for this course, we're using a 2-reader panel, which is the most basic one you can get. So for every 2 readers, you need to have 1 panel. You're going to think about the panel location. You want to keep your cable runs as short as possible. All right. You want to make sure that your lock type matches your access control, right? With an access control system, you're going to use generally an electric strike or a maglock. You don't want to put an access control on a door where you've got a classroom security lock, because you will burn that reader out in a heartbeat and the door won't open, right? So that's pretty basic stuff, and most of you got that down to a science. And then the host location is something we'll talk about, because there are a lot of options now with networked systems where that host really needs to be. So reader locations. First question is, do you need 1 reader or 2? Do you need a record of who went in or who went in and out? That's your first determination. If it's in and out, you need 2 readers. If you need just who went in the room and what time they went in, then it's just 1. And really that's determined by your need for a history. And I have given those to you for this particular project. The outside warehouse is in and out, and the file room is in. Any place else you put a reader, you don't necessarily need a history. It's up to you if you want to put one there. So I would say that your outside door is going to be reader in and out, whichever door you pick. I picked the south. Let you make your decision. And then the file room, you need to know who went in. I suggest a reader there. I know some of you talked about cipher locks there. I wouldn't do it, and simply because they're a pain in the butt. You have to go to the lock to program them rather than do them remotely from your desktop. That's why I like readers better. But again, if you need 1 or 2 is the first decision. Second thing is there a convenient place? And if you look at some of the drawings that we have, the drawing that we have by the conference room there, between the conference room and the break room, there's only a little small place to put the reader there. You can fit a reader on that wall, but you have to look for a convenient place. Sometimes, offices are back to back where there's just a real thin, strip. You don't want to put a reader behind the door where you open the door, right? Somebody's running their badge or standing around their badge to open the door, and then the door opens and hits them in the face. Right? There's a lot of considerations. Make sure your reader is on the opening side of the door, right? So the door where the handle is, you want the reader and the handle to be really close to each other as much as you can. And then something you can't show on the drawing, but ADA requirements, you can't have that reader way up high or way down low. It needs to be 36 inches is the general rule of thumb off the ground that's accessible by somebody either standing or in a wheelchair. Again, you can't show that on the drawing, but I just want to make sure that you are aware that you can't put a reader off somewhere where it's not accessible to someone with a physical challenge. So, do you need 1 or 2 readers? Think about the convenient place to put it on the opening edge of the door, the side of the door that opens, not the hinge side. You want it on the other side. And that's where you'll place your reader. Easy stuff. So, there can only be a certain number of doors hooked to each field panel. And in our scenario, it's 2 readers hooked to a panel. So if you have a door that has readers in and out, that will require its own panel. If you have a door that just has a reader in and they have another door later on that we might add that has a reader in, you can connect those 2 doors, even though they may be 50, 60, 70, 100 feet away from each other. You can connect those to a single panel. And panels are the most expensive, besides the head-end software to run these things. Panels are the most expensive component. Readers are pretty cheap. The locks are relatively cheap, comparatively. But panels can run, $10,000 a piece in some cases. So you really want to make sure you limit the number of panels as much as you can and conserve. Every 2 readers in our scenario requires 1 panel. But there are practical limits as well. If you have a panel and you have 2 readers and they are at opposite ends of your facility, the amount that you spend on wiring could be a consideration too. So let's look at panel locations a little bit differently than perhaps just a matter of 2 to 1. So I call them ugly. Maybe that's not the right word, but a panel is usually a metal box referred to in industry as a can. Right? The can is on the wall. And it's just a metal electrical box that's locked. It usually has a little alarm on it so you know when someone opens that box up, a silent alarm. We'll go over those types of alarms in a couple of weeks. But they can be kind of ugly. I don't know that you'd want to hang one of these on the wall in your executive office or in a conference room, right? You want to kind of put them out of the way if you can. And you have to make sure that you can, in some ways, protect them. So putting the panel inside the room where you're protecting, like maybe in the file room, might be a good option, actually. If you mount them on the wall, again, you won't be able to show this in the drawing, but if you mount them too low, then they get bumped into by things like forklifts, people with carts, industrial carts, those types of things. And they're electronics. You bump into them enough times, you're going to have to repair them. Same token, people then tend to say, okay, well, I'm going to put it up way high where the forklift can't get to it, and now I don't have to worry about the forklift hitting it. But a fuse blows, or it needs to be reset. Someone needs to go in and just do a simple repair on it. They end up having to get a lift truck to safely go up there because the ladder won't reach, perhaps. So most companies don't have those. They rent them. So now you're going down, sending somebody to the rental place for $400 for the day to rent a scissor truck to go change a $2 fuse or breaker or reset something in a panel. So you want it accessible enough where people can work at it, but you don't want it so exposed in a warehouse, perhaps, that it could get bumped, right? And when I talk about the cable and wire runs, the expense of putting these things in is not just the components themselves, but remember there was cabling that went from the doors to the panels and the panels back to the host, right? These are all network cables. If you have things that are separated too far, you're paying to have someone run cable to do that. That's really expensive. It's very labor intensive. Not so bad in a new building like we have, but in an existing building. Can you imagine if you decided, I'm in your house or apartment, I'm going to put the doorbell on the front door and I'm going to put the ringer for the doorbell in the farthest back bedroom. There's a reason they put the doorbell ringer, the thing that makes the noise, next to the front door. It's because it's a short wire run. It's cheap. I mean, you'd hear it better in the back of the house, right? But you put it where you put it because it's the easiest place to put it as far as wire runs. It's short wire run. So you really want to limit those wire runs as much as possible because it's an expense. So there's a lot of ways you can do that, and a lot of places you can hide these panels, even hiding them in plain sight so they don't get bumped and they don't have to be 1,000 yards from the nearest power supply or from where the reader is that the panel is going to be connected to. So where do we normally put these things? Oh, a lot of times they'll go into a closet, a janitorial closet, an electrical closet. There are things called pipe chases in buildings that are multiple stories where the plumbing pipes go up through, instead of going through the wall, you don't want them just in the wall. You want to be able to access them in case there's a leak. So they go through a little closet called a pipe chase. Perfect places to put panels. They're out of sight. You can lock the doors. You can put a storeroom lock on the door. So now you have extra protection on your panel. And they're hidden. But under a stairwell is also a very good location to put these things. Think about in our warehouse picture, we have 2 stairwells that go from the warehouse floor up to a mezzanine where our executive offices, our file room, and our conference room are. Right? Those are kind of up another level. If you saw the stairs there, well, under those stairwells, it's a really good place to consider putting your panels, especially because they're relatively close to both outside doors, right? Whichever one you pick, there's a stairwell pretty close to it. Can they be compromised? Can you protect them? We'll talk about plunger switches on these. Protecting them from being bumped is more something to consider this week. You don't want to get a lift, right? The perfect height to put a panel is picture height. Think about when you put a picture on the wall in your house and you put the nail on the wall, it's usually about eye level. That's about where you want the panel. They are not subject to ADA compliance. They don't need to be at a level because they're such limited access. They're not covered under ADA where they need to be closer to the floor like a reader does. Picture height is really the perfect height to do it. But if you go under a stairwell, there's not going to be a forklift under there. There shouldn't be anything stored under a stairwell by code, right? So you really are in pretty good shape if you go in our particular situation and put them there. And then again, keeping those wire runs as short as possible. Not only is it wiring, but in many jurisdictions, even though this is low voltage stuff, it's not high powered lines running, you still need to put it in conduit. You'll see the metal piping that is strapped to a wall that has wires running through it, conduit, right? It can be really expensive. And so, if you keep those runs short, those wire runs short between readers and panels, that's the best way to be because then you're cutting down the cost right from jump. So when it comes to access control systems, you have electric strikes and you have maglocks. But if you think about an electric strike, and something we hadn't really talked about until now, is that the strike itself moves, right? When you run your badge and it goes back to the panel and says, yep, Brian's good to go ahead and unlock that door, the actual latch on the door moves, right? The door frame kind of opens up, if you will, to allow that door to open. You still have to have some kind of a handle on that door. It can be just a fixed handle, right? It can be just something that doesn't turn. When that electric strike goes, you can pull it. But especially if you're going to put inside the rooms where you're going to put your panel, or if the power is not connected properly, if there's some reason, if you have battery backup that we talked about, where the power is still going to work for a certain number of hours, but the batteries eventually go dead because the power doesn't come back, you're going to need a key to get in there, right? The maglock itself will run out of power and the door will open. With an electric strike, it'll run out of power and that door will stay locked. So you'll put normally a storeroom lock on the door with the electric strike, and you'll have a very controlled key. It'll be always locked, but you have a key as well, just in case something goes wrong with your electronic access control system. You as the security manager can take normally the master key or even something higher than that that's off the master key system over to that door and turn it so that the handle turns now. And instead of the door frame device, electric strike retracting, the actual bolt on the door comes back, right? So, there's 2 ways to operate those. When you have an electric strike, you still need to put a lock on the door. It's almost always a storeroom function lock or just a fixed handle. It's a passage set that doesn't allow passage, right? It's just locked in place. But you need a handle of some kind. I would suggest you use storeroom locks on those. Don't get hung up on that part. If you're using an electric strike, just tell me electric strike, because there's any number of things you can do for the handle itself. Again, just a dummy handle that's fixed in place. As long as that bolt is sticking out of the door to lock behind that electric strike, you're golden. But I do like to have a key override. So make sure your locking type matches it. If you're using electronic access control, it's either going to be an electric strike or maglock. I think you all got that. That's the most important part. But don't put an access control system on a passage set or even a privacy set. If somebody turns that little thumb turn, you got your electric strike on there, the door's still going to open because they'll turn the handle and the bolt will retract on the door. So again, match the to access control system. So one more time, don't just copy my design. I'll be asking you about your logic when we get together in week 14. And you won't have my answers because your logic and my logic are two different things. We have two separate brains. And so when you design your system, just be confident in why you decided to put a certain lock on a certain door, a certain type of device on a certain type of door. Where you put your panels, you did it with some form of logic. I put it here because I believe this was the best place for these reasons. You won't necessarily be wrong unless your logic is really, really flawed. But as long as it matches, you're in good shape. So just don't copy mine, right? How you predict what the room's going to be used for and what you foresee using that room for is really what's going to make your calls on locks. I'm more focused on how you defend your choices and not what choices you make. As long as you can defend them and tell me why you decided to put things in a certain place and why you chose that device, I'm not necessarily going to argue with you. We may have a difference of opinion. We may have a good discussion about it. I enjoy those, but it's certainly not going to hurt you. If those of you who are really hung up on grades, don't worry about that. Worry about the fact that you have a logic that you use to make your design. So the final thing I want to talk about really quick is host location. So the host computer is the thing you sit at, a computer, server, whatever it happens to be. You sit at this with a monitor, and it's where you program everything in. I want Brian to get in and out of this door. I want him to do it. We can set time zones on these things. We'll go over that a little bit in the future, where I only want Brian to get in from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., and then his badge shouldn't work here. I want him to get into doors 1 and 2, not 3, but 4. You can program all those things in the host. That's what filters down to the panel, as you know. Then the panel is the thing that talks back and forth to the readers to allow it to make that decision. The host doesn't necessarily need to be in your building. Modern systems are network systems. They run normally on web browsers anymore. Okay, so basically you can operate them from anywhere. I can sit in my home and I can go on my web browser on my work computer, and I can open up a system and I can turn doors on and off. I can lock and unlock. I can add people to doors in any part of the world right now. If I want to look at cameras, quite frankly, and we'll get into cameras pretty quick here, and I know you guys really will enjoy that. I can look at cameras any place. You can too. You hop on a web browser. If you want to look at the panda exhibit at the National Zoo, then you just fire up their web browser and you can look at their cameras. The host is the same way. On an access control system, it doesn't need to be on the campus. And the reason that that's great is you can have multiple buildings and have one administrator that works at the host. So if I had to go to this warehouse to program this warehouse, the host sat there, and then I had another warehouse 2 counties over, I'd have to get in the car and go and over there and then add people, subtract people, take cards out, put cards in, open doors, close doors, all those great things you do from a host, right? Add panels when the system gets bigger. If I have a single host and it's off location and it's networked, I could do that from one place and operate all of those systems in multiple cities, states, countries from one place. In our drawings, I would like you to put the host outside the drawing. Just put it, you need to show me that you have it, and it's going to be part of your budget, so you need to have it on your drawing. But just draw a little square off the side of the drawing and put host, and then I'll know that that host is going to connect to the panels. You don't need to run your wire. You don't need to show me wires at this point, right? Just put host on the outside, so you know that there is one, and you're going to have to pay for one. You're going to put your panels on your drawings. You're going to then make sure the number of panels matches the numbers of readers. And that's all you're going to have to do for this week. Pretty simple stuff. And let's go over that real quick so you know what you have to turn in and you can get it done quickly and then maybe take a little downtime this week. So as I said, this is week 7 and it's midterm week. But we don't have a midterm. Traditionally, we'd have a midterm and then we'd have spring break. Just a little saying that I like, I heard somewhere a long time ago, is that traditions are just peer pressure from dead people. I always think about that when I see Christmas fruitcake. Some families, we have to make Grandma's fruitcake recipe because Grandma made the best fruitcake, and we make Grandma's fruitcake recipe. And then everybody looks at it like, who the hell eats fruitcake? I mean, that is the nastiest stuff in the world. Don't let traditions, hang up your life. There's your words of wisdom for the week. But we're going to do some work, right? We have the lecture, and we're going to do a little bit of drawing, but there's going to be a lot of time left this week to breathe a little bit. It's just the one assignment of plotting the access system on top of our drawing of our locks on the same drawing. So now we're starting to layer stuff on top of each other, but only one assignment this week. This week you will plot your readers, which you've already done in most cases, right? But you may move some stuff around, right? You're going to plot your panels, the correct number in a correct position on the drawing. And then you will plot your host, which will, for us, will always be off the campus. We put it off this outside the building, and then any person who looks at that knows that this is a remote host. We're not going to actually contain it. Doesn't mean you can't be in the building, by the way. When you have a remote host, it doesn't mean you can't be in the building and go, because it's a web browser. Just like going to yahoo.com or amazon.com, you're going through your web browser to the site. So you could do it from the site if you really wanted to, if you're the security manager. But you could also do it from home or from your office at another site or wherever in the world. But plot those things. You've got your readers plotted. You're going to plot the panels, and you're going to plot the host. You don't need to draw the wiring connecting it. We're going to make the assumption you know that wires connect these things, right? Comments are not mandatory. You put this in a discussion board that's set up for this. Comments are not mandatory this week, but I want you to look and see how other people did theirs. Open up a couple of them. And then if anybody makes a comment on yours, right? And I encourage you to do that. I know that, I'm saying there's no work, but if you make a comment, please go back sometime between, Friday and Sunday, depending if you do work on the weekends or not, and look for comments. That's just common courtesy. If someone took the time to ask you a question, they want to get better at their design and do something better. They have a comment that maybe they thought you did something that might, hang you up. It's common courtesy to go back and look and answer those people, even if you just say thank you. Please do that. I've just noticed a lot of people will make comments on somebody's work and ask them a question, and they never go back and answer it. I think that's a little bit rude. So please display some common courtesy in that regard. You're putting these on the same drawing that you have your locks. So your locks are all on there. Now you're just going to put more stuff on that same drawing. And this drawing is going to get really busy by the time we're done. But I will tell you that security design drawings are a busy thing. And they layer over top. And then you layer them over top normally with other building management systems. And these things look like, it's really, you have to have an eye for reading them. But do it on the same drawing, right? Make any changes to your locks first. You can either erase or you can start with a fresh piece of paper. It wasn't that hard to draw those on there, as you know. You may want to do those again. And I will have a color scheme in the discussion for your access control panels and for your host to use the color code to put the squares around, same way you did with the other one, so that it's very easy for me to look at them and for you to look at them and tell what's what in the drawing. Real quick, one thing that hung up people in previous courses on this, one panel for 2 readers. There are panels that hold more, but we're going 1 for 2. If you have an odd number of readers, you can't squeeze a third one onto a panel, and you can't say, I want to buy half a panel, okay? You'll have capacity later on. You'll have an open slot, right? There'll be 2 slots to put readers in that panel, essentially the wiring, the boards to connect to them. You just save that for later. We may end up using it for something. No need to draw the wiring or the cables. Again, that was something that hung up other people. Take a bit of time this week to catch up on your other classes, to sleep, safely catch up with friends. Please don't, add to the spread. I'm going to still be around all week if you need to talk to me. Don't wait for office hours. Those of you who have had me in the past know I put on office hours, and I'll hop on sometimes on Zoom or other platform during office hours for an hour or so. That's just in case anybody wants to stop in and say hello. I use that hour to sit here and do, grading papers and, working on other courses and things like that. But don't wait for office hours if you need to talk to me. I pride myself on getting back with people relatively quick. As long as you're not too late at night, you may end up hearing from me the next morning, but don't wait for office hours. Text or email if you need me. With that, have a great week. If you're viewing this early in the week, I would go in now and plot that stuff, get it done, put it in the discussion board, bank it, and then go take a couple of days to breathe and get ready so we can start the second half of this course with gusto. Have a great week.